What's happening, everyone? Welcome on into the Check Your Brain podcast. My name is Tony Mazur, and I am pleased to be joined by a guest who I didn't realize until recently was from my neck of the woods, sort of. He's from the east side of Cleveland. I'm from the southeast side of Cleveland. But before I get into that, let me shill for myself before I shill for him and his books. My name is Tony Mazur again. I have a Patreon if you want to subscribe to it, patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. You could subscribe today for $3, $5, or $10, or free if you'd like to. I'm just not going to give you more free content other than one free podcast per week, which is the one you are listening to. Otherwise, if you enjoy my free content, it goes out weekly every Wednesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the other podcatchers. And I'm on Rumble and YouTube and Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Tony Mazur as well. Well, I said I had a guest this week, and I do. And it's a gentleman by the name of Marty Gitlin. He's an author. He's a longtime sports writer. And I got to tell you, I'm going to share the screen here because all you have to look up is Marty Gitlin books on Google. And you say, no, this guy couldn't have written all these books. And then you look and you say, yeah, he wrote all these books. It's incredible. And if you're only listening right now, I am scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and going through this, and it's incredible how much he has done in his career. So I would like to welcome him to the podcast. Marty, welcome on in to the Check Your Brain podcast.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. I'm glad you did.
So what we're going to do here, just for the listeners out here, the we're going to do one where we're going to talk more about pop culture stuff and just the process of transitioning from being the sports writer into doing something that he really wanted to do. And then the second part, which you will hear next week if you are listening to the free episodes, will be sports because we'll be around World Series time. And there's a lot to talk about in pro sports today, but also I like going back in time. I think a lot of people, my pinned tweet is I think sports were a lot better when they still had Marlboro on the scoreboards everywhere. But Marty, let's talk about it because you came on my radar recently. You were on Frank Santopadre's podcast, and you were talking about breakfast cereals. And you say, "Well, gee, why would somebody do a book about breakfast cereals?" And then you started rattling these cereals from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, even into the 90s off. And I was amazed by this. And it was a book that you put out back in I think 2011, 2012. Talk a little bit about it first.
Yeah, I was I was coming off my sports writing days by that time as a newspaper journalist, and I started writing books in 2007 that were like assigned to me. They were educational books that were about history and sports and historical pop culture, whatever. And I decided I wanted to do my own thing and write books that were my own ideas. And I loved cereal when I was a kid. In fact, it's funny, I had actually had a rule when I was a kid that I had to have at least one bowl of every cereal that hit the market. And in the 1960s, there were cereals coming out like every week. And if a commercial came on for a new cereal, I ran to my mother and said, "Hey, you got to buy this new cereal. I have to have a bowl with it." It was like when you're a little kid, anything that makes you different than the other kids makes you feel a little bit distinctive and it gives you a little bit of pride. And, it was kind of stupid, but that was my pride thing is that I had a bowl of every cereal that hit the market. Well, anyway, there was a cereal that came out in 1965 called Banana Wackies. It was a Lucky Charms cereal, only banana flavored. And I knew I was going to hate it because I didn't like banana flavored anything at that time. And my mother, I told my mother, "Hey, you're gonna have to buy this banana wackies, and and I'm gonna have one bowl of it, and you're gonna have to throw the rest of it out because I'm not gonna like it." And instead of saying, "No, Marty, you're an idiot. I'm not gonna do this and throw away all this cereal, waste food," she did, and I had one bowl, but she threw the rest of it out and whatever. Anyway, I've always been real passionate about cereals, and it's just a kind of a fun love that I've had over the years, and I still, even though I know these cereals aren't real healthful for you. Fruit Loops is still my favorite cereal. I still eat it. But anyway, I decided no one had ever really written a book about breakfast cereals, and I got a co-author, and it was the Great American Cereal Book was um, it was really well received. I mean, it was crazy It reached #1 on Amazon in the breakfast book and Americana book categories. It stayed there for 3 months. It's a serial encyclopedia, real fun stuff. And I was it was featured in Time Magazine and Reader's Digest and the Wall Street Journal, New York Times. It was crazy the reaction I got. It actually, was like I say, it was on Amazon for months at #1 in those categories. So it was really a fun project for me to do, and it kicked off my trade book writing. It was the first regular trade book that I wrote that wasn't an educational book.
So yeah, it's called The Great American Cereal Book: How America Got or How Breakfast Got Its Crunch. And it's funny because you you mentioned the banana cereal. And we all know that banana does not, artificially flavored banana, artificially flavored strawberry doesn't actually taste like the fruit. Throughout my childhood, we heard about Apple Jacks, and they said it doesn't taste like apple. Well, of course, it doesn't taste like apple. In your time of all the different cereals that you tried, was there a cereal that actually came close to tasting like what it said it was supposed to taste like?
Yeah, there was a cereal way before your time called Puffa Puffa Rice. And it was the only that I can recall, and that was the only brown sugar cereal that I've ever tasted. And you could taste the brown sugar. I mean, it was distinctively brown sugar tasting anyway. I don't know, how much actual brown sugar was in there, but it was, and there was a commercial. It was a Hawaiian themed commercial with this volcano spewing out all this puffa puffa rice, and it lasted about 5 years, I guess, maybe from about 68 to 74 or whatever, something like that. But it was if there was ever a cereal that I want them to bring back, that would be it, Puffa Puffa Rice. But I'm sure they won't bring it back. It's completely forgotten today, but that's the one that kind of sticks out in my mind.
Like there's you saw that transition from the heavily sugary cereals to we shouldn't call them sugar anything like smack smack sugar smack give me a smack and I'll smack you back. That was there a pre RFK Jr. type of time where it was like, okay, we went from, yeah, sugar, more sugar, and then all of a sudden it's with the cavity creeps and and was there like a time, even maybe a
Oh
date
yeah.
where it seemed like there was a complete transition to probably should call it Honey Smacks or something else, get rid of
Oh,
the
I
sugar
see.
thing.
Yeah. Well, I see what you're saying. Well, the that transition happened maybe I think in the mid to late 80s. I don't know if there was an exact date when they stopped putting the word sugar in the cereals, but it really the seeds were planted around 1972. There was so much public reaction to all the sugar that were in the cereals, and the Food and Drug Administration and the Congress actually got involved with it and all this kind of stuff. And so what happened was they started making healthful cereals. And there was a guy, ah, all of a sudden it slipped my mind what his name was. He used to do commercials eating tree bark and all this kind of stuff in the 70s for grape nuts. And but anyway, they started making, Nature Valley granola. They started making cereals that were more healthful. But while they were doing that, there were all these cereals from the 60s and early 70s that were very sugary that were competing with that. So, parents had their options of going to the market and getting these healthful cereals or getting these cereals that were still had a lot of sugar and were not healthful at all.
Was his
But
name Yule Gibbons?
Yule Gibbons, that's the name. Yes, Yule Gibbons. He had commercials for grape nuts, and he was a lot of late night talk show hosts. Well, Johnny Carson back then, or whatever. They would make jokes about Yule Gibbons because he was like eating tree bark and all these things in these commercials and talking about how great grape nuts was and stuff. So, but yeah, Yule Gibbons. That's right.
People,
Anyway,
by the way, people should also know that it's no secret. It's not one of those government conspiracy theories. Many of the people who worked in big tobacco ended up working in big food eventually. So all those R.J. Reynolds people with the big tobacco in the 50s and 60s, they made the transition into the 70s and in the 80s in the food industry. So just because they took sugar out of the name didn't make it any healthier.
oh
So
no, no, not at all. In fact, When I did that Frank Santopadre podcast, a gentleman from Toronto, Canada, a young guy, 30 years old, at least young to me, he was talking about that, and he was talking about the sugar content and cereals and everything. It's really it's there's more sugar. He thinks there's more sugar now than there ever was in these cereals. It's just not marketed that way because it's not going to be profitable to completely talk about, like in the 50s and 60s they were touting, oh, this sugary cereal, kids love it and all that, but it's not like that anymore. But that doesn't mean they've removed the sugar from the cereal. There's still a lot of it in there.
What was your favorite off-brand cereal, the Malta-Meal that where it was kind of close? It wasn't Frosted Flakes, but it was like Frosty Flakes, and instead of a tiger, instead of Tony the Tiger, it was a polar bear or something like that. Was there a good off-brand cereal you
No,
enjoyed?
there was one cereal that was off-brand that I liked for some reason. I don't know why I liked it. It was called Alpen. Came out, I don't know, I was eating it in the 90s, Alpen. And it was an off-brand, more of a healthful cereal. It had raisins and it had some sweetness to it, and I liked it. But other than that, I've always been, you know, Post, Post, Kellogg's, General Mills, Ralston, Quaker, those cereals. I've always been real mainstream when it comes to that. And Frosted Flakes, I think I'm pretty sure, unless it's Captain Crunch now, but I think Frosted Flakes has always been the most bought, the most popular pre-sweetened cereal ever since the mid 50s when Frosted Flakes was born.
Now, let me ask you a final cereal question. What is the cereal that you have had that retains the milk best, where it's crunchy all the way through? And what's the one where as soon as you put the milk down, it may as well be mush?
Well, you might not want to ask me that question because I like it. Like they always tout cereals. Oh, it stays crunchy in milk, stays crunchy in milk. I don't like cereals that are completely mushed out, but I put a lot of milk in my cereals, so I don't mind cereals but I would say that the cereal Frosted Mini Wheats, because they're thick and they absorb the milk a little bit more, they stay a little bit more crunchy, moderately crunchy, like I like it in milk. So I would say Frosted Mini Wheats would be the answer to that, and they don't get totally mushed out no matter how much milk you put in it.
They also seem to be pretty good as a snack that you could actually eat them without the milk, and it kind of makes sense too.
Yeah,
Because
I've been doing that lately. When I run out, I have a sweet salty addiction going on with food. Like late at night, I'll be snacking and and it's not a good thing, but I'll have, first I'll have some potato chips, then I'll have a little candy, and then I'll have salty, then sweet, and salty and sweet. And it's hard to get out of. And when I run out of something sweet, I just eat cereal out of a box, which I prefer not to do because, like I say, I like milk on my cereal. But lately, I have some tricks. I have some tricks on my couch right now that
I
have
was
to right out
reliably
of the
told they were
box.
for kids.
Yeah, tricks are for kids. Well, you know what? I'm still a kid. I don't. I had a my ex-wife said, it's one thing to be childlike, but it's another thing to be childish. And you cross over that line quite often. And I must admit that sometimes I am a little childish. I try to be childlike and be an adult, but once in a while I'll definitely cross over that line. But
I'm
yeah.
riding that line too because in my background, for folks only listening, I've got Gumby and I've got Pinky
Ah.
here as well. I have the Snoopy snow cone machine, although it's the updated version, not the one from my childhood. And it actually leads me to my next topic that I wanted to bring up is about sitcoms because I found this one on eBay recently, and this is Alf.
Oh,
This is an Alf puppet from
yeah.
when I was a kid. I used to play
Alf was
with this. I
funny.
have a picture of me as a 2-year-old playing with this Alf puppet from, I believe it was Burger King. And I figured, why not just add it to the list of
Sure.
nonsense that I have picked up and accumulated on this desk here. So let's talk about sitcoms. Now, I would assume that Alf, probably not in the top 100 sitcoms of all time, but you did do a book called The Greatest Sitcoms of All Time in 2013.
Right. It was a
And
top
uh,
70.
and
Yeah.
so yeah, so talk a little bit about that book, that process, what your criteria was for the greatest sitcoms.
Well, it should be pointed out that book came out in 2014. So there anything in the last 10 years would not be in that book. But I the la- the I did want to be as objective as possible. I didn't want to be, oh, these are my favorite sitcoms. So I used several criteria: legacy, how long these sitcoms remained in the American and world consciousness, how much impact they made on pop culture, how much impact they might have even made on society. Awards, Emmy Awards, longevity. Did they stay on the air for a long time? Those were some of the considerations I used to rank the greatest sitcoms of all time. And it was a very difficult. I wrote a book ranking the greatest cartoon characters of all time, and that was really easy for number
That's
one.
that's my next thing I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, but the sitcoms was very difficult. There were maybe 5 or 6 sitcoms I could have ranked, number one. But so it was a tough choice.
Because I think a lot of people have a good idea of what's consensus considered to be the best sitcoms, and people start mentioning Seinfeld. Some will mention Friends or All in the Family or Mary Tyler Moore's Show. Uh, but what would you say were some that seemed kind of that someone could read your book and go, wait a second, I wouldn't expect this to be here, but maybe as time went on, maybe because of reruns, maybe because of syndication, that it spiked on the list, or some that where you're like, wait a second, why is this way down here? That wasn't this a very popular show?
Yeah, well, there's a few of those on both ends of that spectrum. The one sitcom, and I guess maybe there was a little bit subjectivity in my putting this sitcom in and ranking it number 39 that I love because there's never been a sitcom like it. It was described as surreal and it was absurd, and the characters were very exaggerated, absurd characters, absurd premise. Everything about it was off the wall. It was a show from the 1960s called Green Acres.
Oh yeah,
And I love that show. I think, a guy raises a pig named Arnold to be his own son, and it just was a wonderful, loopy, wild sitcom. So I have that ranked pretty high, and people either get Green Acres or they don't. They're like, I don't get this humor, or they love it. And in
I got
fact,
it. I got it
yeah.
immediately. That was one of my favorite shows growing up
Oh, is that
because
right?
virtually, and I noticed there was a trend in the 60s with these sitcoms, and I think it may have been part, maybe you can sound off on this, but part escapism because of the rise of a
Yes.
lot of counterculture, the Vietnam War, everything, and it was let's just forget about the hippie movement and everything going on and just laugh for a half hour tonight. But
Well,
it seemed like
you
a lot
nailed
of
it.
those shows, Adam's Family, Munsters, Green Acres, the Beverly Hillbillies, that almost every episode followed the same template. It was over and over again. Green Acres was how is Mr. Haney going to try to dupe Mr. Douglas into pouring more money into some kind of scam, while Mrs. Douglas is dreaming about New York and whatever, and then Mr. Drucker and it even though again every episode seemed to follow that pattern, it still was enjoyable.
That I don't know if you've actually read about this, but you just nailed it. That's what they were doing on purpose. It was called escapist humor, and they were creating shows and characters that were not based in reality, because what was reality in the 60s was the Vietnam War, the assassinations of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King, the riots in the inner cities and college campuses. There were all these disturbing things happening, and so that people that made TV were like, people want to get away from that when they're entertained at night. In fact, it's interesting you should mention that Beverly Hillbillies, because the episode of the Beverly Hillbillies that ran 10 days after the JFK assassination drew 40 million viewers. And it remains today the most watched half-hour TV show in American history,
Wow.
because people were ready to get away from that. And a few months later, the Beatles arrived, and everyone started going. That helped too.
But it's interesting how you had a show like Gomer Pyle USMC. He's in the Marine Corps, yet they don't mention the war that he's supposedly
No,
about
no,
to
they
be sent
don't.
off in.
It's funny that it's kind of a morose a little bit because at the beginning intro to Gomer Pyle, he's marching down the street with all these Marines, and he said that it made him sad to think about that intro because he knew that those were real Marines and some of them were getting killed in Vietnam, and it made him, Jim Neighbors, who played Gomer Pyle, said that it made him feel sad. But I'm going off on a tangent, but you mentioned Gomer Pyle, and that's one of the things that I thought of. But I thought that show, Frank Sutton, who played Sergeant Carter, I think he made that show. His relationship with Gomer, I think, was funny, and it had some level of realism. I think Sergeant Carter was actually a sergeant. Frank Sutton actually was a sergeant in the Marines or the Army or something at one point.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and also not so fun fact, I believe Frank Sutton died on stage.
yeah, yeah, he died young. He was in a really good episode of The Twilight Zone, by the way. But anyway, you mentioned a couple shows that didn't make my book, that people were like, "Oh, these are real popular shows." And they were both the ones I'm thinking of were both by Sherwood Schwartz. The Brady Bunch didn't make my book, and Gilligan's Island didn't make my book
They
because
shouldn't make any book. I'll be honest. I've gone down a Sherwood Schwartz rabbit hole of these shows, and the only noteworthy thing I can say about the Brady Bunch is because it was on the Desilu Productions that they also showed an episode of Mannix on the same set as the Brady House.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't. I wasn't even, and it's funny. I went to high school the same time that these kids were going to high school in the Brady Bunch. I didn't know any kids like that. We were,
You didn't
I
know
didn't-
anyone who was mowing their lawn that had AstroTurf on it?
no, I didn't know kids. No, they were a little bit, well, to be honest with you, when I was in high school, the people that I hung out with were called freaks. We were long hair and the post hippie thing going on. But those kids were a little bit too straight for the ones that I was hanging out with in high school. And I can watch the Brady Bunch and enjoy it if I have the right frame of mind. And Gilligan's Island, I could absolutely enjoy Gilligan's Island. The critics were like, so the critics when Gilligan's Island came out were just like panned it. I mean, they thought it was the worst, disgusting, horrible show ever, but it was, it's one of the most successful shows ever in syndication.
Oh yeah. And then watching Bob Denver all the way through the 90s with his Gilligan hat and his red shirt, and he was going to Comic Cons. Uh,
Well, Bob Denver. Well, in real life, they would have killed Gilligan like within 3 weeks of being there because he wrecked every chance to get rescued. And when you watched it a lot, which I watched all the Gilligan's Island episodes, it drove you crazy. It's like kill this guy already.
so in the 60s, you were seeing this rise of the spin-off. So as we mentioned,
Yeah.
Gomer Pyle's spin-off of Andy Griffith's show, along with Mayberry RFD. And then by the 70s, you had one show, and especially it was All in the Family had how many spin-offs? Was it, well, obviously Jefferson's Maude. Gloria had a brief
Yes.
sitcom,
Gloria.
and I believe, what was it called? 702 Hauser Street, and then Archie
Yes.
Bunker's Place.
Yes. And I believe that the Jeffersons maid in that show had her own spin-off too at one point. Forgot her
Yes.
name.
Oh, I gotta
Um,
look. I gotta look at spin. See, I'm
yeah.
one of those podcasts where it's not one of those where the listeners are screaming at home and then I find out after. I have to find it out immediately. But uh,
Um,
but yeah, I mean, by the 70s, you were seeing this that any type of antic character on a show, like Mary Tyler Moore,
yeah,
you
they
were
had a
going to
lot of
have a Rhoda
spin-offs there.
spinoff. You were going to have
Phyllis.
Phyllis, and they found any way they could. Lou Grant got a
Lou Grant was
serious
right.
spinoff with that, and but then you also had something called, and I'm sure you know this, and I'd like you to tell the listeners about this, the backdoor pilot. You know about the backdoor pilot, right?
Yeah, sort of. I never heard that expressed that way. If you could explain what you mean by backdoor pilot. I think I can explain it
So
also.
the backdoor pilot is where they would take an episode. So let's say, for example, the Golden Girls episode called Empty Nests. And it starred, I think, Paul Dooley and Rita Moreno as a couple who lived next door whose kids left the house and they had to deal with being middle-aged people living with each other, trying to stand each other when their kids aren't here. And you're going, hey, where's Dorothy and where's
Oh,
Rose and where's Blanchett? And so what that was an attempt in the 70s, 80s into the 90s of trying to fit these characters to use as a spin-off, an eventual
I
spin-off and
see.
test it with the audience. Now, that episode is usually the lowest rated and lowest viewed and lowest ranked Golden Girls episode, but it was enough, and Susan Harris had enough cachet that they did make a spinoff of Empty Nest, which didn't make sense because Richard Mulligan had his kids
Yeah.
around there, and it again didn't make any sense. But there were other times they tried to do that. They did it on Home Improvement with Dave Chappelle and Jim Brewer, and eventually they got one, and no one watched it. It was called Buddies. There were others, I think Joe Bologna and what's his name, Matt LeBlanc on Married with Children, where you would hear Al Bundy would say, "Ah, my good friend such and such." You would never see that good friend up until that point, and you never saw that good friend again, except for that one episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, were there other examples that you saw where
Yes.
you're like, "Oh gosh, they're really trying this"?
I hate to get back to Green Acres, but the last two episodes of Green Acres had nothing to do with Green Acres at all, and they were trying to pitch spin-offs. They were in Hawaii, and there were two different episodes with different characters in them, and they were trying to pitch spin-offs of those shows, but in those cases they never spun off. They I guess they were rejected by the networks or
Never
whatever,
went
and
to series.
never became a series. They just had the one episode. You know, Oliver and Lisa were at the beginning of the episode, and then they would run into someone for whatever connection that they had, and then they were gone in both those episodes.
You know what the big
But
one,
that
there was the Flintstones had that where there was didn't they wasn't there a time on the Flintstones maybe in the final season where there was a hillbilly neighbors they were there.
yes,
Oh,
yeah, and they had another one where they were in a haunted house, Carmela Creeper or something like that, and whatever her name was. I don't know if they ever, I don't know what they did with that, but I'll tell you what. The first episode of the last season of the Flintstones, they ran into an alien, voiced by Harvey Korman, the Great Gazoo.
hello,
And
dum dum.
yes, and yeah, exactly. And there was and that was the jump the shark. We talk about jump the shark moments in the Flintstones. Absolutely, when he showed up, I loved Harvey Korman on the Carol Burnett show, whatever, with Tim Conway. But then they went. He took them in the future, and they went to Mars, and they had they went to the hillbilly home and the haunted house and all this kind of stuff. The Flintstones was a nice little show with a family. It was based on the Honeymooners, completely based on the Honeymooners, and it was fine. And then the last season, it just went off the rails.
Well, do
But
you think the
anyway,
Flintstones jumped the shark with pebbles?
yeah, some people believe that too. That when they had the kids, and then I think it was the last season, might have been the second last season, where the Rubbles got Bam Bam, and Hopperoo. The Hoppy, their little dinosaur that they had. But anyway, yeah, I might agree with that too. That the when Pebbles and they made a big deal out of it. On the I guess it might have been the last episode of one season, and Fred's running down the street. Oh, we have a baby coming. Whatever. They made a big deal out of Pebbles Flintstone coming on the show. But
Now,
anyway, yeah.
as far as your ranking of sitcoms, where would you say that a laugh track would have hindered it, or did it really not matter all that much as far as your
Didn't matter
ranking?
to me. I I didn't like the, well, that was another. I mean, I almost chose All in the Family number one. I chose it number two. All in the Family revolutionized everything. It changed everything. I mean, every controversial issue in America was verboten in sitcoms. They never talked about them. They never joked about them ever, ever, ever. The Vietnam War and racism and bigotry and homosexuality and
Abortion with
religion and
Maud.
yeah, it changed right. Yeah, All in the Family just hit all those issues head on, and then it just changed everything. But so All in the Family also eliminated the laugh track, at least on that show. They didn't have it. It was in front of a live audience.
From Studio
And
City in Hollywood.
yeah, that's right. And so all of, I mean, I think if Mike and Gloria hadn't left for Next Door and then leave for California after 5 years, and they had kept going with that same formula, I might have had All in the Family ranked number one, but I have it number two. I actually don't mind telling you, I ranked Seinfeld number one because it was just
So
so darn funny.
so I'm obviously a big Seinfeld fan as well. And there is basically, I would say, three eras of Seinfeld because you watch the Seinfeld Chronicles, that first season, and it kind of looks like a typical 80s sitcom where it's very New York. It's very, as I think even Rob Reiner said, and Brandon Tartikoff, they said it was too Jewish at the time. And but there was a lot of it was very that in fact the George Costanza character that Jason Alexander played, he didn't realize and through that first season that he was supposed to be playing Larry David when he was actually doing kind of a like a nebbish Woody Allen type.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so
yeah. Yeah.
so when you watch those early episodes, he's doing very like doing Woody, and instead of realizing, oh
Oh,
no,
you could
he's actually
see you could see that Woody Allen connection with him, no doubt about it.
so then eventually they started gaining their legs, I would say probably about season three-ish, through probably the time when Larry David eventually left the show largely for good. And I say largely because he came back to do the final episode. But then when you had the glory years of Seinfeld, Larry leaves and in those final two seasons, Jerry is the executive producer, and you kind of see the impact of Spike Firestein and Jerry and others, where the humor got way more absurdist, as opposed to where it was
Yes.
more of a hey, we've got story A, story B, story C, story D. Let's figure out by the end of the episode how all four of these kind of
Yeah.
converge in some way. Like the marine biologist is obviously a classic. How do you get Kramer golfing and getting sand everywhere? Or well, that was a different one, but and the golf ball and everything like that. How do you bring that together? It was genius by Larry David. But then by the end, why is Kramer bringing up pieces and parts of the Merv Griffin set into his
Oh,
apartment?
that's
And the
one of my favorite
first time you
episodes.
actually see his full apartment, and yet
Yeah.
that was the same show. And Seinfeld is one of those long-lasting shows that I believe didn't get bad, and I think it ended right on top.
Yeah. I'm not sure I agree totally with you on that last point because I thought the last season the characteristics and the idiosyncrasies of these characters got so off the
A little
wall that
goofy.
and like Elaine got very more like angry. George got Kramer got like too ridiculous, I think. He gets flour on him, and Newman is eyeing him like a chicken leg or something, and I thought and I thought the last the finale was very disappointing
Yeah.
because at the remember what happened in the last episode. They're looking at some overweight guy getting held up, getting mugged, and they're
Played by John
laughing.
Panette.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and they're laughing about it and joking about it. And I thought that went over the line from absurd, from a show about nothing or whatever, and to like borderline cruelty. And I didn't like that. And I just didn't think the last, I thought they just kept, bringing back these old characters and what happened in the show. I thought the only great finale ever, in my view, in a classic show or a great show was MASH. I think.
I
I
was going
was
to
a
ask
little
you about
disappointed.
MASH because
Yeah.
MASH is another one of those shows where it depends on who you talk to what the glory years were. But I would say
Yes.
when you're dealing with when you have Trapper John, I've went back in time because MASH when I was a kid, he was usually on when the team known as the Cleveland Indians at the time would be on a rain delay and we're watching channel 43 WUAB and you would just hear do and you're like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
MASH, this is what my parents watched. And so I
Right.
went back several years ago to watch the first 3 4 seasons of MASH and I said this show's brilliant.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
completely brilliant. Every character is amazing. And yet when you started seeing more of Alan Alda's input and impact on the show, when eventually the characters and being shot dead over the Sea of Japan, and Gary Berghoff coming in with the news, and you started seeing the difference. And of course, they also got rid of the laugh track, which I don't think they wanted in the first place, but that was early '70s TV that
Right.
they kind of were forced to do it. But what are your thoughts on just the whole canon of MASH, a show about a war that lasted, I think, like a fraction of the time the show was
Oh,
actually on
yeah.
TV?
Yeah. That's interesting. MASH was the first dramedy, considered to be really the first dramedy. I think Alan Alda and Loretta Swit were like two of the best pure, actors to ever appear in a sitcom. I liked all the eras. My favorite era was the middle era after they got rid of Trapper John. I liked Trapper John. And it was more manic, a little more outwardly funny in the earlier days. There wasn't
It
as
was
much
a little almost
drama.
like a conventional sitcom.
Yeah, a little bit more. But I liked BJ Honeycutt and I liked Potter,
Father
Colonel
Mulcahy.
Potter, more than I like Colonel Blake. And like the middle years, until Radar left, I liked the year, I liked Radar. I thought he was a really good actor too. He won several Emmys for that.
He also got a spinoff too called Walter, and
Oh
I think
yeah,
it
I
only
forgot
went to
about
one
that.
pilot, and
And
that
then there
was
was
it.
After MASH also, which was a spin-off
Yeah.
that Klinger was on. But
By the way,
and
I gotta say just for the audience, there is a really funny joke that was in Family Guy that they were doing. I think the Return of the Jedi episode of Family Guy, and they were doing the crawl, the Star Wars crawl, and it says, "In that time after MASH, but before after MASH." You're like, that is a specific joke that I think only 5 people in the world appreciated, and I'm one of them.
well, and it's funny because the All in the Family finale, which we were talking about, drew 107 million viewers.
I don't
And
even remember that.
yeah, it was wonderful. And it was more serious than funny, but anyway, it's the most watched television show in American history,
Yes.
period. And the only thing that's been watched more than the MASH finale is the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But being from Cleveland, I wouldn't know anything about that. But
Yeah. It was Super Bowl, did you say?
yeah,
I don't know. I have no idea what you're
they
talking
named the
about.
Super Bowl after the Super Bowl. Actually, that's the story anyway. But anyway, yeah, I know. Being from Cleveland, Cleveland and the Browns and the Lions are the only two long established teams that have never been in the Super Bowl. And the Lions should have been in there a couple of years ago. They blew it at the end of that game. Anyway, I'm going off on tangent again. So sorry.
Well, you were talking about finales because you mentioned about All in the Family, and like All in the Family and the Jeffersons and the Norman Lear shows. I thought it was interesting. I talked about it recently on a podcast about the what's called the rural purge, and it
Yeah.
in 1970 71, Fred Silverman, CBS, and eventually it went through all, the other two networks. They basically decided, "Now let's get rid of them. Mayberry RFD. I thought Beverly Hillbillies was on
Beverly
way too long
Hillbillies.
by that point.
Gomer Pyle was already gone, but
Yeah,
Beverly
so
Hillbillies was
you
still
started seeing Petticoat Junction. Yeah, all these shows ended up getting canceled within
all of
basically
them.
a
They
year
axed all of them.
because they started leaning towards the more Norman Lear socially conscious shows. However, there not everybody was into them. They were very popular, but eventually they said, all right, well, there's an outcry, let's put a show. So they greenlit the Waltons, and then the Waltons became like the number one show on
Yeah.
TV for a while.
Little House on the Prairie.
So for
Yeah.
whatever reason, we still have that rural urge in us right now to the point where
Oh,
some of the most popular TV that we've seen the last couple of years has been Yellowstone, and they've also had a couple of spin-offs.
well, it's funny because those shows were still highly rated. Beverly Hillbillies was high in the Nielsen ratings, and Petticoat Junction, whatever, those were Mayberry RFD. Those were still highly rated shows, but they axed all of them because they wanted to go more modern, more youthful. The younger people were
The baby
more
boomers.
into, yeah, and right, exactly. So that's what they did, and it was a purge. Everything with a tree in it.
Yes.
They got rid of it.
Yeah, and but it's almost like they kind of forgot that though there is this large demographic that is now entering their 20s that is watching TV, they also kind of forgot that there's that silent generation that still is also watching TV. So, and they kind of
Oh,
appreciated
huge.
the
It's
covered wagon
interesting.
shows.
The Andy Griffith Show, which I do not watch the Andy Griffith. Well, I don't watch it at all anymore because I know all the lines by heart. So I don't watch. But the Andy Griffith Show reached number one in the Nielsen ratings um, only after in like 67, 68, after Don Knotts left. No, I don't watch it. And I know a lot of people that are Andy Griffith fans. They don't watch the Andy Griffith Show unless Don Knotts is in it. Barney Fife, that manic deputy. And I mean, he was brilliant. He won several Emmy Awards for that role. But it wasn't number one on TV. It reached number one on TV 2 or 3 years later because I think even though it sucked, I didn't like it anymore. It had this rural, calming, edge to it, and a lot of people on farms in Nebraska or whatever were still watching that show.
Yep.
So there was,
Yeah, this was post Floyd the Barber after the stroke, right?
yeah, that actually Barney was still there when after Floyd the Barber had his stroke, and the last year of Black and White in '65, you'll never see him standing up. He's always sitting down.
Yeah,
I
he's
mean,
holding the newspaper in the hand that he is able to. But
yeah,
yeah.
that's right. Well,
Well,
you're
so
for a
so it's
young guy, you
interesting.
know your stuff.
Last thing I want to mention about the sitcoms, I had on this podcast. I got to be friends with him because he lives in. I'm not going to dox him, but he lives in Pennsylvania now. But William Sanderson, who played Larry of Larry, Daryl, and Daryl fame, and Newhart, the Bob Newhart show is an incredible show, and you want to talk about a great character who's playing the straight man, which is what Bob Newhart did on his comedy albums, which reached number
Yeah,
one and number two at the exact same time, where he's on the phone,
on
he's
the
playing his
phone.
own straight man, even though he's also playing the goofy character, which is brilliant. He basically does that as Bob Hartley, and you have Suzanne Plachette and all the Mr. Carlson and all the other great characters that came from that show. Then by the 80s, they come up with this new show, Newhart, where he's the innkeeper. He's Dick Loudon. He has Mary Fran as his wife. And I thought the show, you want to talk about absurd, that
Yeah,
it was very absurd, but also great characters, Kathy Kinney, Tom Poston. But that final episode, a show that I thought I grew up with Newhart, good show, not as good as the original. I think everybody knew it wasn't as good as the original, but that final episode, in my opinion, I think is better than the MASH finale because of the twist at the very end.
that was absolutely brilliant. When he wakes up in bed and he turns on the light, or she turns on the light, Suzanne Plachette, and everyone cheered, and it was like, I cannot believe they're doing this. And oh, I just had this unbelievable dream where I was an innkeeper in Vermont, and it was just genius.
It was
That was one of the greatest moments in sitcom history, no doubt about it.
I,
It
I
it
I
you
went to
know
I went to lunch with William Sanderson and I was asking him about these questions and I said, "What did you know at the time?" And he said, "Well, first of all, we knew the show was basically done because they kept moving time slots in the 80s because it was preempted for sports, it was preempted for this and that, and we knew it was about done." And then they started floating things in the press that here's what's going to happen, and the rumor is that Dick dies, and he goes up to heaven, and God is going to be played by Don Rickles or George C. Scott, and so. So because that rumor was floated into the press, people started saying, "Uh-oh, the final episode is that they're going to kill off the character." And it turns out that when the whole cast got to the table read, they said, by the way, we added another page, but don't say anything about it. So they were
Wow.
surprised by the time they got onto set, and so was the audience. They had to put some partition to show that people wouldn't know that that's the bedroom set that everybody remembered from 15 years prior. And it was perfect. And they did it in one take. You heard that smoker's voice of Suzanne Plachette,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah.
worked. And oh, was it just
The
fantastic?
smoker's voice, that's very good. Yeah, it was like they did that when they killed off Colonel Blake in MASH. They didn't tell anyone about it until they were just about to shoot it, what was going to happen.
And
And
don't
so
you hear a
that's
bedpan or
right.
something that's dropping in the background
Yes.
because somebody was
Yes, someone
actually
drops
legitimately surprised?
an instrument. Yeah. Right, right.
So
Suture
Marty,
or whatever.
last thing I want to ask you about the sitcoms. Then I want to talk about the cartoon characters, and then we'll end part one of our podcast, our conversation. Then we'll go into part two about sports. Um, as far as the sitcom today, where are we at? Your book came out in 2013, which I think was the perfect time because I can't name a sitcom since 2013 that it would even be worth put on the list. Now, by the way, there is very good TV out there, but I wouldn't call those sitcoms. It's very good, well-written TV that's on the streaming services, but nothing as far as a typical 22-minute network television sitcom that really is worthy of being on some great list.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you, is the sitcom dead?
I don't know. I don't actually, to be honest with you, I don't follow it as closely as I used to. I think that the last era, the last great era was, with a Big Bang Theory and Parks and Rec and Office and whatever. And then, I was enjoying a show for a while called Schitt's Creek, but I liked the first year of Schitt's Creek and I liked some episodes, and then I was watching more of it, and I just didn't think it had legs. Um, so there's so many streaming services now and all these kind of things, and I'm more I'm old. I'm 68 years old, man. I mean, I was in the network era of all these things, and I don't, I have my Roku, and I watch my Guardians and Cavaliers games, and I don't watch a lot of modern sitcoms anymore at all. There was one episode that I saw of a show called Animal Control, and I don't even know if it's out anymore. And I laughed. I thought it was pretty funny. But I've seen a few episodes of modern sitcoms, and I just think that they're so tied to political and social correctness now that so much of the fodder for humor has disappeared because they have to be so careful not to and I mean, I understand sensitivity like anybody does, but they have to be so careful with the humor nowadays, and I think that's a problem. And I just don't think, and me personally, anyway, I like older sitcoms anyway because I like absurdity. I like characters and premises that are not based in reality. Why else would I like a show like Green Acres? That's just my kind of sense of humor. I like, and I think in today's day and age, it seems like these characters have to be realistic characters and kind of funny within that realism. And I understand that. That's one of the reasons I like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, because he was an exaggerated nerd. He was an exaggerated character, and I like him. I thought he was funny. But anyway, as far as like what's going on right now, I couldn't really even speak intelligently about it because I've seen bits and pieces of shows, and I didn't really think they were that funny. And my what my TV watching has gone in a different direction anyway.
I think it kind of ties in with the fact that there really isn't a good comedy movie either. That, like you said, that because I see this when doing
Yeah.
stand up is that when you have a funny concept, but then you have to start peeling layers because you might offend this group, you might offend that group. And when you start doing that, the potential for funny, I've noticed, it's not saying that you can't still be funny, but you are now censoring yourself to a point where it I don't know, it kind of artificially sweetens it, and it doesn't. The joke I think you were going for is not going to pop as well as it would. That's why I think of comedy movies that I can't remember the last great, whether PG-13 or R-rated movie to go to and go like, hey, that was really funny. I was slapping my knee the whole
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
And that's probably has to do with it. I think
yeah.
the tastes have changed, the humor has changed. The I think probably maybe the good thing is the laugh track has gone away. That the shows like The Office and Parks and Rec did not have a laugh track, so you didn't have to guide your audience on what joke you're supposed to laugh at. And that's good, but I just don't know what else there is to laugh at going forward. But so last thing I wanted to talk about, Marty, is you had another book about the greatest cartoon characters. And what was your criteria with that? Are these cartoons as TV cartoons, movies, newspaper, or all of the above?
Um, Animated cartoon characters.
Okay,
We're
yes.
talking about TV. They had to have some kind of impact on television to be in there, just characters that are like Shrek or whatever, who I loved, but he wouldn't make the book because it was called a celebration of animation, the 100 greatest cartoon characters in television history. So they had to have, even obviously characters that were created well before TV are in the book because they were shown on TV also, Popeye and Bugs Bunny and whatever. But the criteria was largely the same. One of the criteria that we used was personality, whether it was an evil character or a funny character or a superhero, how well their personalities match those, the intent of what the character was. And unlike the sitcom book, which was very difficult to pick number one, the cartoon characters book was an easy choice for number one. I
I
told
would
my
assume
told my
Bugs Bunny.
co-author, yeah, you nailed it. I told my co-author Bugs Bunny's number one. Let's move on, and he
Well,
agreed. He said, "Yeah, let's move on."
do you know why I would consider Bugs Bunny to be number one? Because the early days of Termite Terrace, Bugs Bunny was not always the hero. That he eventually became the hero. He became infallible. That no matter what you do to him, he's Teflon. But in the Tex Avery version, there's the one where the gremlin on the World War II aircraft, and Bugs Bunny's getting beat to hell the entire
Oh yeah,
episode, just stomped, thrown out of the plane. It's truly incredible. And so, not every time, depending on who the director was, whether it was Tex Avery, whether it was Chuck Jones, that Robert McKimson, that they were
yeah.
using different criteria of you take a character, but it's like do whatever you want with this character. It's like there's really no rules with Bugs Bunny other than I guess he's like the main guy we're leaning towards. And people should also know that he kind of appeared on accident in a couple of other earlier cartoons, and
Yes.
that Porky Pig was the first real star of the Warner Brothers.
It's interesting. One of the things that makes Bugs Bunny great was that he never provoked the other cartoon characters. He was always the one getting picked on, and then he would fight back in very, very imaginative ways. And what that allowed Warner Brothers to do was it allowed them to play off all the other characters with Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck or Elmer Fudd, or my very favorite cartoon character of all time, which I only ranked number 26 in my book because I was trying to be objective. Our book, I have a co-author, Yosemite Sam. I love Yosemite Sam. He's just so wacky. He's just so out there. But anyway, it allowed him to play off of Yosemite Sam too. And that was unique to all those great Warner Brothers characters, Foghorn Leghorn and Porky Pig and Daffy Duck and Elmer Fudd and whatever, Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, Sylvester and Tweety. Bugs Bunny was unique in that way because they played off of him so well with all those other characters.
I hate to turn it negative, but when Warner Brothers closed up their animation studio, I think it was the late 50s, I believe. And then they kind of came back and they were doing more TV stuff. And they were with, I believe it was Seven Arts. So it was Warner Brothers Seven Arts.
Yeah.
So whenever I remembered growing up and I'm like, oh, Looney Tunes, I can't wait. It's Saturday morning. And I would see that W7 logo and going, oh no. Oh no, what are we going to have? And it was Bunny and Clive, and it was who was the cool cat? Cool cat, who was voiced by Larry Storch, and a couple of others that were just bad
Yeah,
cartoons. And then they did these weird combinations of Speedy Gonzales and Daffy Duck that never made sense to me. And it was like they were trying to really, and the animation got very cheap, very, because again, you were doing it for television. You
right.
weren't seeing the greatness and the catalog and the orchestra from the Warner Brothers days. However, it just was very cheap, and I just remembered watching that, going, "Great, it's Bugs Bunny, but it's not the
It's
good
not.
Bugs Bunny."
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And in the when television actually came around, by the way, a little trivia here. There was a character named Crusader Rabbit.
Yes.
He 1948, he was the very first cartoon character made for TV. But when TV came around, the animation suffered a lot because they were so busy making so many different cartoon characters and they had to make them for like daily use or weekly use or whatever it was.
It was called limited
They didn't
animation. So if you ever
they
see the
didn't have enough
Flintstones,
depth. There wasn't the depth in the animation.
yeah, if you ever see the Flintstones, Barney and Fred were walking, and they're walking, they keep passing by the same window or the same lamp,
Yeah,
and it's because it was in a lampshade type of structure that they were doing this. So yeah, of course they were walking, and they were passing the same things over and over again, and that was called limited animation.
I really think that Tom and Jerry was like the peak of like animation depth, and greatness. But anyway, yeah, that's what that but it doesn't mean that there weren't a lot of great cartoon characters in the television era. A lot of great ones, and one of them that was very simply drawn, who's my very favorite cartoon character from television, is Bullwinkle.
Yeah,
And Rocky and Bullwinkle. I
Jay
mean, it was
Ward.
really the jokes were more for adults than kids. They had the whole Cold War thing going with Boris and Natasha, and the humor was great. And my co-author and I actually put five Rocky and Bullwinkle related cartoon characters in our top 100. That's how great that was. We had Bullwinkle, Peabody, Snidely Whiplash,
Dudley
Boris
Do
and
Right.
Natasha, and Dudley Do Right. They all made our book, which says something about how great those shows were.
And they were like a radio show because they would have June Foray,
Yeah,
they would have oh, I forget Paul Frees, and William Conrad, who eventually became canon and was in Jake and the Fat Man later on, but he was the voice, he was the narrator guy. I loved Rocky and Bullwinkle. So it's like if the animation is limited, make it up for it in the writing. Although I think that's where the Hanna-Barbera cartoons. What were your thoughts on the Hanna-Barbera cartoons from
well,
the
yeah,
60s through the
the
80s?
anime, I that was my era. I used to run home. There was a show that was well before your time called Captain Penny. I don't know if you know who Cap Ron Penn found. He used to actually announce the names at Cleveland Stadium for the ball players.
I've heard
Coming to
his
bat
name, yes.
now is Andre Thornton, whatever. That was Ron Penn found, and it was called Captain Penny, and we used to run home after school every day to watch Captain Penny, and he showed all the Hanna-Barbera characters and all the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, and I liked them, but they could not ever be compared to Warner Brothers in terms of greatness. I liked Magilla Gorilla; he was my favorite. I liked Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound and Snagglepuss and all these wonderful. They had a whole dozens and dozens of cartoon characters. They had two shows. One was called Peter Potamus and one was called Magilla Gorilla, and they each had three different cartoon shows in it, each one. And I was really into that, Ricochet Rabbit, and all these. Anyway, I'm going off again, but I don't think Hanna-Barbera, compared to Warner Brothers in any way, shape, or form. But there were a lot of good cartoon characters in it, real formula stuff. But I enjoyed it when I was a kid. I don't
They
know. I don't think I would enjoy it today.
Yeah, I've gone down rabbit holes with Hanna-Barbera cartoons and seeing from the 60s where yeah, you had the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, but then eventually you were seeing Wacky Races and Captain Caveman, Jabberjaw, Josie and the Pussycat.
Yeah,
It was I'm like, well, wait a second, they dominated Saturday morning TV. Everywhere you went was a Hanna-Barbera production. What happened? And what happened was the 80s that they weren't marketable characters to sell toys for to Gen X. That He-Man, Thundercats, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, those shows ended up Transformers, My Little Pony, Care Bear, that they were much more marketable. So you couldn't really buy a Fred Flintstone doll because it kind of looked a little goofy. It didn't really look like him, and you
Right.
couldn't do a 3D version until you got John Goodman to do it a decade
They turned
later.
those into
But
cereals too
yeah, yeah.
in the
It
80s.
was it. Yeah,
Strawberry
exactly. That yeah, you
shortcake.
could do breakfast cereals with. Look at that. We're coming full circle here in this episode.
Yeah.
But no, go check out Marty's books, whether it's on cereal, anything pop culture, and there's just a ton to go through. So if you're only listening to this podcast, we're going to do another one that's going to come out next week about sports. So we're going to get into that
Yeah,
here. But
real quick, Tony. If anyone wants to check out my books, the best way to get them is to go to etsy.com/shop, SHOP /Gitlin books, GITLIN books, etsy.com/shop/Gitlin books. And then I can, ship them for free and I can autograph and personalize them for you. And it's there, and it's actually cheaper than getting them on Amazon. So that's the better way to do it.
yeah, I'm trying to share my screen for whatever reason it was having problems. Otherwise, I was going to put all this together. But yeah, we're gonna talk some sports next. So for the people who only listened to this one, you stumbled upon this. We have another episode coming up. But if not, could be a good standalone episode for everybody else. But Marty, thank you again for joining me here on the podcast. Again, if you want more. To find his books, etsy.com/shop/Gitlin, Gitlin books. And you don't need to worry about the .com there. Etsy.com/shop/Gitlin books. Marty, thank you for joining me here on the Check Your Brain
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that.
And I'll be back with you next week with Marty once again here on the Check Your Brain podcast, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, and Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. I am Tony Mazur. Talk to you soon. Bye now.